Hey, fourth period. Sorry we've been pulled to take care of some business and I can't join you, but I want to give you enough support and instruction on exploring these rhetorical appeals that you feel really strong in digging into this. So you've already watched What is Rhetoric. I think that gives you a pretty comprehensive view of what's happening here. And I'll remind you, we're going to be using something like this, soapstone, this level of rhetorical analysis to look at different kinds of rhetoric and also how you can be an impactful writer of rhetoric. So be thinking in your head, when you watch those TED Talks, who do you think those target audiences are? Is it a specific group? Is it people that want to know something? Is this people that want to learn something? And specific to the ones you watch, think about the tone of your talks. Were they informative? Were they kind? Were they forthright? Were they inspirational? Different tones show up in different ways in rhetoric. Just a quick reminder of the rhetorical appeals, and I have the slideshow linked for today. So if you need to slow down and look at these again, you can certainly pull that up and go through these slides. So thinking about the questions that I developed for you when looking at those talks, that's definitely rhetorical analysis. And we see, was the speaker a good match for the topic? That is credibility. That's ethos, right? Why would you listen to them? What's important about them? What makes them a good match? What evidence of research did you see? That's the logos and logical appeal. What stats or facts or evidence do they provide for you that makes them really logical and following their rhetoric? And then how do they become connecting or engaging or entertaining with their audience? That's that emotional appeal. That's what makes someone want to engage and stick around for some kind of rhetoric to hear what you have to say. There's all kinds of incredible rhetorical devices out there. Assertions and claims. These are directly stated as facts. Mrs. Brooks is the best teacher ever. Pure fact, right? No, but this is how an assertion or a claim is stated in rhetoric. Sometimes we also have generalizations, assertions about groups or a class that implies that every member shares that common characteristic, such as teenagers spend too much time on their phones. We see this a lot in media rhetoric, where people are drawn to something because of generalities. Qualifications. To agree in part or to sort of reshape that assertion slightly. So an example would be, I agree that Mrs. Brooks is the best English teacher I've ever had, but not the best teacher overall. So they can offer an assertion, but qualify it in a different way, offering sort of a reshaping of that idea. Sometimes you get concessions or counter arguments. To concede, that means you admit that the other side really, really has a point, and maybe you're offering some kind of counter argument to directly address that point. So I think that Mrs. Brooks is an excellent teacher, but clearly Mrs. Mink is the best teacher ever. So they are conceding and offering a point in the other direction about the thing that they think is absolutely true in their rhetoric. The last part is also anecdote. These are personal stories, very powerful in rhetoric. Storytelling is that part that draws us in and makes you want to take the journey with someone. And maybe the TED Talk that you watched had someone with a very strong anecdote. So we're going to briefly look at a few ads. This has a shoe ad, right? Carrie Underwood, she's a singer. And we have some things that have to do with credibility and a few things that have to do with emotions and pathos. Look at all those puppies. How could you not want to engage in your heartstrings with those little puppies? That is definitely an emotional appeal. You could draw little red hearts all over those things. And gold stars and the credibility appeal, that's using a celebrity. Advertisers do this all the time. They address or deal with using celebrity or someone that has a following or a reputation and paying them to sponsor or support their products because of their ethos. Looking for credibility and ethos appeals here. So look at him. He's in a white coat. He's a dentist. Clearly, he's got a very serious, stern educational face. This is happening 24 hours, 7 days a week of protection. We had this quote from the dentist himself, letting you know that, yes, he's a real medical professional and that you can trust his opinion about this particular product. We're looking for some logos and logic appeals here. So 2 Bounty paper towels, they need to be useful. It's a product. 2 times more absorbent, so you can use less. 2 times. That is a number. That's a statistic. That they're offering you a fact. They're also offering you images here that provide you facts that should, in some ways, feel irrefutable. For some might be more skeptical of advertising, but those are definitely meant to be logical appeals, appealing to your sense of logic. Like, oh, well, if it's 2 times better, of course I'll buy them. Or clearly look at the difference, of course I'll buy them. So thinking through some scenarios, let's say you need to use an appeal or explore an appeal. You want to dye your hair bubblegum pink and you know your parents are not going to be on board with this. You have to convince them. If you say, if you don't let me dye my hair, it will ruin my life. That is very much an emotional appeal. Tug at the heartstrings of your parents. If you don't let me do this, it will ruin me forever. Or expert psychologists say that kids need to be free to express themselves. This is an ethos, a credibility appeal. You're showing that an expert psychologist, a medical expert, is saying you need that kind of freedom of expression to be an expressive and whole teenager. Or, and very simply, a ethos credibility, or logical appeal, you let my brother get a mohawk. Well, it's perfectly logical. If you let him do it, why wouldn't you let me do it, right? You're going to be working through scenario 2 independently in the questions that follow our lesson today. So rhetoric can be extremely powerful. It can be inspiring. People can reference it and be influenced by it for years and years and years, but it can also be incredibly dangerous and misleading. Just like in the intro to rhetoric video about good people using communication well, sometimes it's not always a good person. Sometimes it's just a very, very smart person using communication well for a very dangerous means. So when we come out of this, my goal for us really is that we understand the effect of rhetoric on your human psyche, that you have a better understanding of your biases, of your beliefs, of the things that are true for you. What is effective, what's not effective, ways that you can use this. And in your call to action, having appeals that are effective to calling your audience to take some action. Understanding that there are limitations to the functionality of rhetoric on the internet and how you can see past those and be a more critical thinker when you interact with them. Hopefully you'll be able to understand what qualifies as a worthwhile idea when you engage with it. Give it a little space, explore it, analyze it using a soapstone or realizing what appeals are there versus knowing what is simply predatory propaganda. That's what makes something noble or worthy versus very dangerous. And engaging in constructive dialogue versus the faces throwing arguments of the internet, right? After you watch This Will Make You Angry, that will enlighten some ways for you on how that works specific to the internet. It can be extremely challenging to engage in really constructive give and receive dialogue and feedback using the internet as a forum for several reasons. I mean, think to yourself, I love this. Did it help you change your mind? Did you change their mind? Or no one's minds were changed and everyone was angry? Oh boy. Oh, internet. So you may think to yourself, have you ever engaged in a political argument on social media? Maybe you haven't. That's not something that interests you, or you prefer simply not to act on that. Maybe you do and you feel extremely impassioned about it and you have a story to tell about this. Part of your reflection will allow you to tell me more about this if you feel so inclined. Hello, Jeanette. Hello, Jeanette. So something I want to show you briefly, and you can Google the media bias chart. This is so cool. This is a way to sort of help organize in our head a way to look for media that is very, very, very neutral, but also to understand which ones fall on either end for bias, and maybe also help you understand where your bias is in a very systematic, logical kind of way. So this key deals with things that are more reliable versus less reliable, and bias being more right-leaning or perhaps more left-leaning. And at the very tip top are news sources or media sources that we find statistically, factually, to simply be right there in the middle. Because the thing about media is they really tailor their rhetoric to the core beliefs of their audiences. They want to appeal to those that generally follow them. And Taken recently, these are headlines from the 7th about the events in our nation's capital on the 6th. Three very different kinds of headlines about the same situation or incident. These are the rioters in the domestic terror attack. Protesters erupted at U.S. state houses, isolated violence, and evacuations. Congress finalizes Biden win after a violent pro-Trump mob storms Capitol. So I'm not trying to discuss the validity or merit of them. I'm simply just showing you the differences on how different media outlets can express this. So be thinking, which one is the most mild? Probably right here. Protests erupted at the U.S. state houses, isolated violence, and evacuations. Headline using the strongest terms? Probably here. The writers in the domestic terror attack. Terror is a very powerful word. So when you think about rhetoric, consider what you're engaging with, analyzing what appeals are there, what's being presented to you, the bias and credibility of that source, but also your own bias and understanding of beliefs and how you want to interact with that as you move forward. So after this, you'll watch this video will make you angry and help you understand a little bit more about why fights get so engaged and heated on the internet. The last thing you're going to do for me today is open up the Exploring Rhetorical Appeals template. Please make a copy and share it with me. And then I've given you a few places to explore what you watched and viewed today and how you can show me that you have an understanding. Maybe you learned something new, or maybe something was very, very familiar to you. Make sure that you share that with me so that I can read your responses.